No one would have imagined that a simple village boy from East Java would one day live in Portugal, not as a tourist or laborer, but as the husband of a wealthy 36-year-old widow who once employed him. His name was Azam Fathoni, and his journey began in a humble farming village in Lamangan. His father was a tobacco farmer, and his mother sold vegetables from door to door. Life was never easy, but Azam never complained. Instead, he grew up with quiet strength, deep faith, and a strong determination to change his destiny. By the age of 12, Azam had enrolled in a traditional Islamic boarding school, or pesantren, in Gresik. It was here that his love for knowledge blossomed. While he dedicated himself to Islamic studies, he never closed his mind to the broader world. The school's small library became his favorite place. He would spend hours there, poring over books on history, languages, cultures, and the lives of scholars. One picture, in particular, stirred his soul, a grand image of the Al-Azhar Mosque in Cairo. From that moment, he dreamed of studying in Egypt, to sit at the feet of great scholars and master Arabic from the very source. Years passed, and at 20, Azam's dream came true. He was selected for a full scholarship to Al-Azhar University in Cairo. When he received the letter, he broke into tears. The idea of flying for the first time, living in a foreign land, and walking the halls of his dream university felt surreal. In Cairo, Azam became known for his discipline and kindness. Though he faced financial struggles, especially when scholarship funds were delayed, he remained steadfast. He took on small translation jobs for tourists and incoming students, quickly gaining exposure to people from across the globe. Those years molded him into a man of patience, compassion, and quiet charisma. Upon graduation, Azam didn't immediately return to Indonesia. He longed to explore more of the world and gain experience abroad. He began applying to companies across Europe that valued Arabic language skills. Weeks later, he received a response from a culinary company based in Lisbon, Portugal. The company specialized in Middle Eastern spices and dishes, and it needed someone to oversee Arabic product research. The company, Sabores do Oriente, Flavors of the East, was owned by a woman named Isabella Moreira, a stern, accomplished widow who had thrown herself into business after a difficult divorce. When Isabella saw Azam's CV, a graduate of Al-Azhar, fluent in Arabic and English, and knowledgeable about Islamic culture, she was intrigued. When Azam arrived in Lisbon, he was given a modest apartment above the main production kitchen. His job was to research spice profiles, consult on menu development, and help ensure cultural accuracy in their Middle Eastern dishes. At first, Isabella kept her distance. She was known for being cold and strictly professional. But soon, she began to notice something unusual about this young man. Azam didn't just work hard, he worked with sincerity. He was always the first to arrive, even when not required. He greeted everyone kindly, from the chefs to the janitors. He often helped organize shelves or clean up the kitchen, all without being asked. To Isabella, this seemed like an act at first, perhaps a way to gain favor. But as the weeks passed, she realized this was just who Azam was. One day, Isabella arrived late to work. Her car had broken down, and she was tired and irritated. But when she entered the office, she was taken aback. Her desk was organized, the meeting materials neatly stacked, and a cup of warm mint tea, her favorite, sat quietly beside her laptop. "Who prepared this?" she asked. "Mr. Azam," the secretary replied. "He said his mother always makes mint tea when someone has a headache." Isabella stood silent, staring at the tea. It was the first time in years she felt noticed, not as a businesswoman, but as a person. From that day on, her demeanor toward Azam began to shift. Their interactions grew warmer. Isabella began inviting Azam to idea meetings for new menu items. She was drawn to his perspective, especially when he spoke of food with philosophy. "In our culture," Azam once told her with a soft smile, "food isn't just about flavor. It's about the heart that prepares it." That sentence struck something deep in Isabella. Her life had been devoid of sincerity for a long time. Since her divorce, her days had been filled with contracts, suppliers, deadlines, but not with genuine human connection. One evening, after the successful launch of a new menu, Isabella invited Azam out to dinner. Not to a fine dining place, but a humble seafood stall near the harbor. "I just want to talk," she said. Azam hesitated, then agreed. "At least I can enjoy the Lisbon night air," he thought. That night, their conversation flowed easily. Isabella asked about his childhood, about life in Java, about Cairo. "Why are you always so patient with people?" she asked. Azam smiled gently. "Because I was taught to understand before I demand. And as long as something doesn't go against my religion, I try to adapt." Isabella listened silently. That calmness, that unshakable peace, was something she hadn't felt in years. After dinner, she sat alone in her living room for hours. Her heart was troubled, not because Azam was attractive, but because she had never met a man who treated her with respect without expectation. From that moment, things changed. Isabella found herself waiting for his greetings in the morning, watching how he worked, how he spoke. She found herself smiling more. But she also knew this was complicated. She was older, of a different culture, and not Muslim. Would this even be possible? Azam, too, began to sense a shift. Isabella started inviting him into her office more often, sometimes just to chat about the weather or ask philosophical questions. "Do you think I look old?" she once asked. Azam replied sincerely. "Age is just a number. What matters is how you use the blessings you have." The office staff began to gossip. Some thought Azam was trying to climb the ladder through favoritism. Others speculated there was something more between them. Azam ignored the whispers, but his heart was beginning to stir. Not with desire, but with confusion. He feared that his presence might lead others to judge Isabella unfairly. Meanwhile, Isabella was fighting a battle of her own. She began questioning not just her feelings, but her life. Why did she feel peace when Azam spoke? Why did his faith seem so rooted? Why did his values bring her comfort? One afternoon, Isabella called Azam to meet her on the back porch of the office. Spring air drifted gently around them. She looked him in the eyes and said softly, "I don't know if you've noticed, but I feel something, not as your boss, but as a person." Azam was stunned. Not by her honesty, but by her courage. Azam looked down for a moment, his mind racing. He hadn't expected this conversation, not like this. He respected Isabella deeply, not only as his employer but as a woman who had treated him fairly and offered him opportunity in a distant land. But he also knew how complicated this was. "I respect you," Azam said softly. "Truly. But I also believe we come from very different paths. I don't want to mislead you, or anyone else." Isabella nodded. "I understand. That's why I wanted to be honest. I've been trying to understand your world, your way of thinking. Your peace. Your faith." Azam was silent, surprised. Isabella's eyes, once sharp with business acumen, now held a softness, a searching quality. "I've started reading," she said, "about Islam. Not because of you, but because something in me is restless. And I want to understand why you seem so grounded in a world that feels so chaotic to me." Azam listened quietly. He had no idea that his presence alone had sparked such reflection. He didn't try to preach. He simply replied, "It's never about forcing belief. But if you're searching for peace, then I think you're on the right road." From that day on, something shifted between them, not in formality, but in sincerity. Isabella became a student of sorts. She asked questions about Islamic beliefs, values, and daily practices. She watched documentaries, listened to podcasts, and read books Azam quietly recommended. Azam never imposed, never pressured. He simply lived his life with dignity and sincerity, answering only what she asked and letting his actions speak louder than his words. One evening, Isabella found herself sitting in her living room long after sunset. The Qur'an translation she was reading rested in her lap, and tears welled in her eyes. For the first time in years, she felt clarity. Not answers to everything, but the courage to seek them. A few days later, she invited Azam to the quiet riverside park near the Tagus River, one they often passed on their way to work but never stopped at. As they sat on the bench, the wind carrying the faint scent of salt and sea, Isabella took a deep breath. "I've been thinking a lot," she began. "And I'm sure now." Azam turned his head slowly. Her voice was calm, but firm. "I want to become a Muslim. Not for you, not to be closer to you, but because I feel it's the path I've been searching for." Azam was stunned, but not doubtful. He saw it in her eyes, the sincerity, the determination. He smiled gently. "Then you don't need my permission. But I can introduce you to the community. They'll help you take the step properly." And so, just a week later, surrounded by members of the small Portuguese Muslim community and a visiting Moroccan imam, Isabella quietly uttered the Shahada, the testimony of faith. Her voice trembled, but her heart was firm. "I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, and I bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah." That day, Isabella was no longer just a successful businesswoman or a curious seeker. She became Salma, a name she chose herself, meaning peace and safety. Her eyes sparkled with a calmness Azam had never seen in her before. Salma's transformation was not just a name. Her inner world began to change. She started waking up early, speaking more gently, dressing more modestly, not because anyone told her to, but because she wanted to realign her life with the values she now believed in. Some of her business associates were confused, even alarmed. "Why are you changing? What happened to the old Isabella?" they asked. But Salma remained composed. "I'm not erasing who I was," she would respond. "I'm just learning to be who I truly am." Azam, during all this, remained quietly by her side, not as a guide, but as a friend. He answered her questions, protected her dignity when others doubted her, and gave her space to grow in her own way. Weeks later, on a warm Lisbon afternoon, Salma invited Azam to her home once again. This time, she was more nervous than before. Her hands trembled as she handed him a cup of mint tea. "Azam," she said, almost whispering, "I want to ask you something serious." Azam sat quietly, listening. "I've thought about this long and hard. And I know it won't be easy, but I want you to be a part of my life. Not as an employee. As my husband." The words hung in the air. Azam was still. He looked at her, at the woman who had transformed before his eyes, not just in faith, but in spirit. He took a deep breath, and instead of answering with fear or confusion, he said gently, "This is not a small matter. Marriage isn't just about emotion, it's about responsibility, trust, and long-term peace. If we walk this path, it must be with sincerity and clarity." Salma nodded. "I know. And I don't want this to be just a relationship. I want it to be a journey of faith and companionship." There was silence for a moment. Then Azam smiled slightly and said, "If your heart is ready, then mine is too." That evening, the stars above Lisbon seemed to shine a little brighter. Two very different lives from two different worlds were now on the verge of becoming one. Azam and Salma didn't want a grand celebration. Both of them believed that true commitment was not in lavish venues or expensive clothing, but in the sincerity of the heart and the presence of meaningful witnesses. So, they planned a modest wedding. The venue? The very same park bench near the Tagus River where Salma had once expressed her desire to embrace Islam. That place, simple and quiet, had become sacred to both of them. It was a place of honesty, of beginnings, and of peace. The ceremony was intimate. A few of Azam's friends from the local mosque, several members of the Muslim community in Lisbon, and some of Salma's most respectful business colleagues were invited. There were no limousines or luxury gowns, just heartfelt blessings, soft sunlight, and a strong breeze off the river. Salma wore a simple white dress, long and flowing, paired with a light cream scarf that draped gently over her hair. She looked serene, radiant in a way that made it impossible to believe she was the same woman who had once buried herself in contracts and cold professionalism. Azam wore a modern cocoa shirt he had ordered from an Indonesian shop in Lisbon and paired it with a neat black peace-eye cap. He looked confident, but modest, exactly as Salma had always seen him. When the nikah ceremony began, Azam's voice was steady, though his heart was racing. He uttered the marriage vows with conviction, each word soaked in gratitude. And when it was complete, Salma's eyes shimmered with tears. It wasn't just the legal union of husband and wife. It was the spiritual union of two hearts who had walked different roads, but arrived at the same destination. After the wedding, Salma and Azam moved into a small apartment not far from Salma's business headquarters. It wasn't because they couldn't afford something more spacious, but because Salma wanted to build their new life with simplicity and intention. She also made a quiet yet firm decision: Azam would no longer be her employee. Instead, he would serve as a consultant and partner in the business, offering guidance in areas of product development, cultural alignment, and outreach. She didn't want power dynamics to interfere with the sanctity of their marriage. Azam respected her decision. It was yet another sign of her sincerity. The first few days of married life were filled with small adjustments, different habits, different routines, and learning how to make room for each other. But because their relationship had grown from a foundation of mutual respect and faith, those adjustments were filled with warmth, not friction. In the evenings, Salma would prepare mint tea, just as Azam used to do for her before. "Honey, are you tired?" she would ask. Azam would smile, sitting beside her on the balcony. "No, I'm at peace," he would reply. "You look really happy today." Salma would gaze at him and respond softly, "Because you're here. I used to think life was all about control and results, but now I see, it's about who we walk with." Their apartment was modest, no unnecessary decorations, no distractions. But it was filled with light, with presence, with prayer, with soft conversations and shared meals. In the quiet, they found joy. And soon, the change in Salma became evident to everyone around her. At the office, people began to notice that she smiled more, that she listened longer, that she no longer rushed meetings or treated mistakes with harsh judgment. The woman who was once known for her sharp business acumen was now praised for her kindness and fairness. Employees felt the atmosphere shift. "What happened to the boss?" they would whisper. "She's different now. Softer. Happier." Some understood. Others speculated. A few judged. Old business partners and colleagues began to ask difficult questions. "You married a man 12 years younger than you? He's not from here. He's not even Christian. Isn't that dangerous for your reputation?" But Salma remained calm. "My life is not built for public approval," she would reply. "It's built on truth, peace, and sincerity." There were friends who distanced themselves, unable to accept the changes in her. And Salma let them go without bitterness. She no longer chased connections that didn't nurture the soul. Azam never tried to be the face of her business or flaunt his place beside her. He remained quietly behind the scenes, offering support, advice, and encouragement. When Salma was tired, he offered his shoulder. When Azam felt unsure, Salma became his strength. They were not just husband and wife. They were allies, companions, mirrors to each other's growth. One evening, as they sat on their balcony sipping tea and watching the sun dip behind Lisbon's skyline, Salma leaned her head gently on Azam's shoulder. "Did you ever think your life would be like this?" she asked. Azam chuckled. "Honestly? I thought I'd become a Qur'an teacher in my village. Maybe marry the neighbor's daughter. Live quietly in Java." Salma laughed softly. "And I thought I'd grow old in a big empty house, chasing deadlines and profits. Alone." Azam took her hand in his. "But Allah always writes a better story than we can imagine." Salma nodded. "A story full of meaning, not just milestones." They sat in silence. But in that silence there was peace. And in that peace, they knew, their story was not about perfection. It was about intention. About choosing each other every day, not because they needed to, but because they were better together. 2 years had passed since Azam and Salma became husband and wife. On the surface, life had settled into a rhythm: calm mornings, balanced workdays, and quiet evenings filled with tea, shared books, and the occasional stroll through the riverside park. But beneath that rhythm were quiet trials. Tests that didn't announce themselves loudly but crept in slowly, through society's whispers, cultural pressures, and moments of personal doubt. The first came in the form of judgment. Some of Salma's older clients couldn't understand her choices. "She used to be the most reliable in the industry," they'd say. "Now she's married to a young foreign man and wears a scarf on her head. Has she gone soft?" Others questioned her business judgment. "Does your husband influence your decisions now?" someone asked in a boardroom. Salma smiled and calmly replied, "Yes. He reminds me that honesty and heart matter more than just margins." Some clients pulled out. Others grew distant. One longtime business partner, a French culinary investor, sent an email politely suggesting that personal transformations should remain private, so that the company could avoid being overly associated with religious identity. Salma took a deep breath and typed her response carefully. "Thank you for your concern. But my identity is not a marketing variable. It is who I am. If that makes my company less suitable for your portfolio, I respect your decision." Then she hit send. Azam supported her silently through it all. He never told her what to say. But every time she returned home exhausted from the burden of public perception, he would simply listen, his presence reminding her that she wasn't alone. They both knew that real growth often came with resistance. At home, they maintained a life of simplicity. Azam continued volunteering at the local mosque, sometimes giving short talks to new converts or helping with youth events. His Arabic skills and gentle demeanor made him a bridge between cultures. Soon, he was invited to speak at small interfaith events and cultural seminars. His story, of faith, migration, love, and purpose, resonated with many. One afternoon, he was invited by a university in Lisbon to give a guest lecture titled, "Eastern Values in a Western World." The audience was diverse: students, professors, researchers. Azam stood in front of them, calm yet firm, and said, "People often think faith is about restriction. But I've learned that true faith brings freedom, from arrogance, from greed, from the illusion that success is only material. It gave me a home in a land where I had no family. It gave me a wife I didn't expect. And it gave me a voice, not to dominate, but to connect." The room fell silent. And then, applause erupted. Salma sat in the back row, watching him speak. Her eyes welled with tears. Not of sadness, but of quiet pride. After the lecture, she told Azam, "You've become more than my husband. You're becoming a light for others." Azam smiled. "I'm just a reflection. The light is from Allah." Together, they launched a small social initiative called Open Hearts, a community program that helped Muslim immigrants and converts in Portugal navigate the challenges of adjusting to life in a new land. Salma used her network to arrange job training, business workshops, and small scholarships. Azam offered mentoring, counseling, and language help. The program didn't grow because of money, it grew because of sincerity. People felt it. Volunteers came forward. Donations arrived unexpectedly. Stories of transformation began to emerge: young refugees, confused converts, even elderly Portuguese people who simply wanted to understand Islam better. Every Friday, Azam and Salma would host a small discussion circle in their apartment. Tea, snacks, open dialogue. No preaching, just stories, questions, and reflections. And in those evenings, their living room would fill with laughter, emotion, and unity. But not every moment was easy. One evening, Salma came home visibly shaken. She had overheard two former acquaintances speaking ill of her in a cafe. "She's brainwashed," one had said. "Trading wine for scarves. Trading reason for rituals." Salma didn't cry. She didn't rage. She just walked into her apartment, set her bag down, and stood silently by the window. Azam approached, gently placed his hand on her back, and whispered, "You don't need to prove your peace to anyone. Just protect it." She turned and embraced him tightly. "This world doesn't forgive women who change," she murmured. Azam held her close. "No, it doesn't. But Allah does. And that's enough. That night, they prayed side by side, shoulder to shoulder. Not in desperation, but in gratitude. Because even in the face of mockery and loss, they had something unshakable: trust in each other, and trust in the path they had chosen. It was a late summer afternoon in Lisbon, the sky brushed with soft hues of gold and lavender. Azam and Salma sat quietly on the same riverside bench where so many chapters of their story had begun. This was their ritual now, watching the sunset together in silence, letting the rhythm of the water speak what words could not. Salma leaned her head on Azam's shoulder and whispered, "Sometimes I forget how far we've come." Azam smiled, his fingers gently clasping hers. "That's because you walk with purpose. Not with fear." The wind stirred gently, rustling the leaves above them. It had been 3 years since their marriage, and though the world around them kept shifting, politics, business, opinions, their bond remained still and strong, like the river before them. Azam was now seen by many in the Muslim and Portuguese community as a bridge between East and West, tradition and progress, faith and modern life. He never sought a platform, but people were drawn to his humility. Invitations to speak at universities, embassies, and cultural centers increased. But he never let that change his essence. He still brewed mint tea every morning. He still kissed Salma's forehead before she left for work. And he still left little handwritten notes in her handbag that said things like, "You're doing great," or, "Smile, Allah is with you." Salma had evolved too. Once known as a tough, perfectionist entrepreneur, she was now respected as a woman of balance, graceful in leadership, gentle in speech, and grounded in her principles. Her company, once laser-focused on profit, now championed ethical sourcing, cultural respect, and inclusive employment. She had also become a quiet mentor for women who were either new to Islam or simply searching for a deeper kind of life. "You don't have to rush to change everything," she would tell them. "Just start by changing the way you see yourself through God's eyes." But life, as always, had its storms. Salma's health began to decline, not suddenly, but in slow, subtle waves. Fatigue clung to her more often. Some days her hands trembled while chopping vegetables. Doctors said it was stress-related at first, but deeper tests revealed early signs of an autoimmune condition. Azam never panicked. He simply adapted. He cooked more. He walked beside her instead of ahead. He bought her thicker scarves for warmth and softer prayer mats for comfort. When she struggled to sleep, he would recite Quranic verses by her side until her breathing slowed. "I'm afraid sometimes," Salma admitted one night as she lay in bed. "Afraid that you'll grow tired of caring for someone who's not as strong as before." Azam took her hand and kissed it gently. "Love isn't tested in strength. It's tested in weakness. And I don't love you for your energy, I love you for your soul." She turned her face to the ceiling, blinking back tears. "And I love you for bringing me back to mine." Despite her condition, Salma refused to retreat from life. She simply adjusted. Meetings became shorter. Schedules more forgiving. She stepped down from day-to-day management of her company and appointed a new team, one she personally mentored. Instead, she focused on what mattered most: writing. At Azam's encouragement, Salma began documenting her journey. The transformation from Isabella to Salma. From a secular businesswoman to a believer. From loneliness to companionship. She titled the manuscript, "Open Hearts, A Journey from Self to Surrender." Publishers were quick to show interest, and within a year, the book became a quiet sensation across Europe's faith and interfaith communities. Readers praised its raw honesty, its grace, and its refusal to reduce Islam to stereotypes or romance. But the greatest praise came from a letter written by a young Portuguese woman who read the book after struggling with depression. "Your story gave me hope," she wrote. "It made me believe that peace is not found in control, but in trust. And that love does not demand, it nurtures." Salma read the letter aloud to Azam, and as her voice trembled, he leaned over and kissed her cheek. "You've given more to the world than you know," he said. As time passed, they simplified their lives even further. The business ran on its own. The Open Hearts program continued under new leadership. Their apartment, once filled with notes, guests, and activities, now welcomed silence. But it was a nourishing silence. A sacred kind. Every so often, young couples or curious visitors would still knock on their door, eager to hear their story. Salma would sit on the couch, her hands wrapped around a warm mug, and say, "We didn't plan this life. We just kept saying yes to truth." One evening, after a walk slower than usual, Salma paused at their doorstep and said, "You know, sometimes I think about my past life and wonder how I survived it." Azam unlocked the door and looked at her, his eyes full of tenderness. "You didn't just survive it. You transformed it." They stepped inside. That night, as they sipped tea and gazed at the stars from their small balcony, Azam whispered, "This world moves fast, but we don't have to. Peace doesn't race, it waits for those who are willing to pause and reflect." Salma nodded slowly, resting her head on his shoulder once more. And in that moment, nothing was missing. Not success. Not status. Not applause. Just faith. Love. And the comfort of knowing that two souls, so different in origin, had chosen to walk the same road, side by side, for the rest of their days.